Hi everyone, welcome to the B++ podcast. This is Abhii Dabas. And as you know, the B++ podcast is all about speaking to founders, speaking to technology leaders, and speaking to subject matter experts in the field of technology and how they are helping different businesses and different geographies. Today we have a very, very special guest who has braved the cold and managed to be here. And his name is Matthew Brennan. He's a keynote speaker and author of the book Attention Factory, The Story of TikTok and China's ByteDance. He's a co-founder and managing director of China Channel. A lot of things, that he's doing, and I'm so excited to be speaking to him today. And we'll touch upon some of the different things that he's doing, and we'll get started, on the business side. But first, hi, Matt. Thank you so much for being here, and lovely to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here and share with you guys today. Sorry for the cold.
Not at all. So, Matt, I mean, before we sort of jump into the book and, what you're doing, and I would just like to know, and I'm sure the listeners of the podcast would really want to know, what led to the journey from London, was it, to China, and when did that happen, and how's the journey been so far?
Oh, yeah, sure. You're right. I'm originally from London, from the UK, and I studied economics at university and came out to China straight after. Originally thinking I'll stay for a year and then go back and just to teach English. I was going to go work in the city of London, right, and go work in a bank or something very boring like that. So it didn't work out that way because when I got to China, I stayed to learn Chinese. I was fascinated by the culture, and I could see that China was just growing really, really fast. It's a really exciting place to be. I mean, when I go back to London from China, I feel everything's so slow and nothing's changed. Especially back, I first went to China almost 16, 17 years ago now. So that China's gone. That's a different China that doesn't exist anymore, because back then everything was booming. I mean, it was really crazy. The economy was growing double digits in terms of GDP growth every year. And it really was like, that's not fake numbers at all. Like, it was absolutely crazy. And it was, as someone who is, has a sort of entrepreneurial gene inside me, I guess. Like, I felt, I had to be a part of it, and I had to, stay and just ride this wave that I could see everyone else is riding. And there's just such optimism in China. People would just have this attitude of can do, like, and even today, I think that still powers through a Chinese attitude of like, just work hard and the Chinese do work extremely hard. Let's just make that clear. But there's a reason for that, because hard work is rewarded usually in the private sector. And so I stayed to open some education centers with some friends. We pulled some money together and we franchised a school chain. And then later on, I went to work in the head office of that company, and I got into research and development, and I got into building software. And from there, we called it e-learning, but today you would call it edtech, I guess. But back then, e-learning was the phrase that we used. And I really was involved in the first wave of selling software in China, educational software, to parents for the K-12 market in lower tier Chinese cities, tier 2, tier 3. Very difficult to do at the time. This was pre-mobile in smartphone era. Just moving into the smartphone era, actually, just about 2010, 2011. Right. And we had to sell it to parents who didn't really want the software at the time. Today, totally different. The Chinese are very progressive about the e-learning, and there's many startups that have scaled up to very large valuations selling online courses. But even 10 years ago, it was a very different landscape. So it went through all that. 2015, WeChat broke out. That's when mobile payments started to really hit the ground. I was on the ground. I could see this was just huge. And I was so inspired by WeChat and WeChat Pay and everything that was happening with all the innovation in China's mobile, that I just said, okay, I have to start my own company and start doing stuff around this. So that's what I did. I started China Channel in Shanghai, and been going since. And really that was for me to break out and do my own company at the time, because I'd been working at this education firm for over 6 years now, was a big thing. But especially as a foreigner in China, doing your own company, your own thing is, I think it's got easier and easier over time. But still, it's a big thing. And at the time, we didn't know what we were doing at the beginning, but we sort of learned how as go along. And the sort of passion carried me through that. I knew that this was really important, this area, and it was actually fundamentally changing China. And today, I think China's starting to get this recognition around the world of being like a tech, hub of the, rivaling Silicon Valley in some areas like mobile internet and e-commerce. That didn't really exist 5 years ago. There was no acknowledgement really of China at all. People thought it was a copycat. Copy to China was the model, and they were just cloning American ideas and solutions. That's not true. There was a lot more going on than that. And I think moving forward, the future is actually very bright for this area still. And I think, this is where I want to stay, and this is the value I can add to the world of being some form of bridge between China, where I speak Chinese. I lived there for so long. I understand the technology and all the products that people are getting excited about. I use them, and I write about them. And then, outside, where there's this strong interest now and growing interest around, how can we learn from China? What are the lessons here? And the book is just one format of this. There's, TikTok's. Everyone knows TikTok around the world now, but we were excited about TikTok in 2018 in China. It was very clear 3 years ago in China that this was a special product. And so I had all this sort of background knowledge and experience that I could put into the book of, how this came from 0 to 1. And I don't think TikTok's going to be the last breakout global hit from China at all. There'll be several more in the next few years. We don't know exactly where yet, but they're coming.
Right. Absolutely. So thanks so much for, such a great, that was great storytelling, I must say. It's thanks so much for sort of taking us through the journey. And and you mentioned the book, and that was something that I was really curious about. Like you said, TikTok's taken the world by storm, and obviously there's a lot of politics around it as well. And, but the fact is, it was a very refreshingly new product. And I think somebody out there definitely figured out that this is the best way to engage with this demographic. And they built it, so successfully. And to the point that I see there is a lot of, insecurity in Instagram over the last couple of years. And I see how Instagram is trying to be more like TikTok over the last couple of years, and sometimes successfully, sometimes not so successfully. So how did you sort of decide to write the book about it? I mean, it's one thing as a, technology professional to, maybe talk about it at an event, but what made you decide that I want to write a book about this?
Well, in many ways, this is a COVID book, right? I don't think I would have had the time to sit down and really write extensively, research extensively all the details around the platform without COVID-19 disrupting us all. And so it was really just making productive use of that time. And the more research I did, the more I got into it and found, that there's really, I originally was going to write about 4 different platforms, four different companies rather, Huawei, Tencent, Alibaba, and ByteDance. And ByteDance was actually the up and coming company that I put on the list last as like, okay, that's on people's radars now internationally, so we should include them. I was very optimistic about the company and was using their products for many years, quite heavily actually, but that's also the same for Meituan Dianping, for example, or Pinduoduo. But there's not the same level of awareness around those Chinese companies globally. Yeah. But ByteDance was getting there, and so. But the more I did it, the more I wrote and researched, the more I found, okay, there's actually a lot here. I spoke to my friends who work there as well. I've got friends who've worked on TikTok from the very early days because they've hired so many people in China and around the world. They're opening up offices everywhere. Right. But the point I want to make is that when I started writing the book in seriously in January last year, a year ago now, the global awareness around TikTok was at a very different level to where it is today. It really hadn't had this big breakout in terms of global awareness. That happened in the summer of last year. And so as I was writing, I sort of found that the global interest in the topic that I was researching was growing and growing every day and getting to crazy levels that I never thought possible. And then Donald Trump got involved and everything just went mad. Not planned, that sort of thing. So I just, it was quite fortunate, I guess, in terms of awareness, because the sales have done quite well for the book. So it's mostly due to the topic, it being top of mind, I think, rather than my amazing writing. Although I do think I'm pretty proud of it. I think we did a good job.
Well, congratulations on all the success. I'm sure it's very, very well deserved. And, the couple of follow-up questions I wanted to ask you about the book and, of course, ByteDance and TikTok. Obviously, as we were discussing earlier, the listenership for our podcast is a lot of decision makers working with large companies. So the first question that I wanted to ask you, based on your research, is how can large companies, across sectors, how can they leverage a platform like TikTok to market their products and engage with the customers? And then the second question, from a startup founder's point of view, because again, a lot of startup founders, are regular listeners of our podcast, and they would want to know, what did ByteDance do right, and what did they get right in terms of the product, in terms of the marketing, in terms of the positioning, timing? Based on your research, what do you think, if you're a startup founder today, what are those things that you can learn and sort of implement in your startup that TikTok got right?
Yeah, those are two great questions. Quite different ones, but yeah. Okay, let's take them one by one.
Sure.
So what, a TikTok marketing essentially is what you're asking about the first question. How should we think about that? What's the sort of what's the opportunities there for companies?
Right.
Well, TikTok, first of all, a lot of, especially people my age, people who are very busy and don't use social media a lot. They're busy executives, probably don't even use the platform, and that's quite reasonable. So they might have some, to be honest, a lot of executives, their children use it. That's how they know it, right? Like, okay, my kids use this app, so it's an app for kids. That's how a lot of these platforms start. And so I don't think you should write off TikTok as a platform just for kids. It's really the paradigm to think about TikTok is YouTube, I feel. Think of it as a short version of YouTube. If you really want to just simplify things and think, like, why would I even want my company to be on this platform or do anything on this platform? Well, would you want to be on YouTube? That's, today I don't think that would be a question that would need much explaining to people, right? Okay, if I've got video content, I should probably put that onto YouTube. For certain industries, YouTube would be a very important content channel in order to build an audience and grow your brand. For other industries, not, right? So for some industries, they wouldn't want to do YouTube. YouTube's not easy.
Yeah.
I think very much the same questions here around TikTok. TikTok's not easy. If you want to actually build a brand through TikTok as a company, it really lends itself to it's a user-generated content platform, and it's usually about influencers. It's about creators. It's about people. They're the ones who do well. Brands can do well on there, but they need to be smart about how they do it. And there's definitely case studies of brands doing well. If you've got access to lots of good video content, a constant stream of it, if you're in the media industry, then definitely TikTok, absolutely, you should be on there. If you're doing video content. But for, if you're a B2B business, probably not in most cases. So it really depends what you're doing. But the opportunity there compared to something like YouTube is that user acquisition is much easier, right? The platform's younger, that the a balance of supply and demand in terms of really good content and niche content, and then actual attention and users on very mature platforms like Instagram and YouTube, it's very difficult to get viewers and followers today. Whereas TikTok, I think you still got about 12 months. I think for most of this year, it's obviously every month it's good. The balance is changing and it's equalizing out, and eventually it will shift towards oversupply, as it has done as we've seen on pretty much every major platform. But today it's probably the easiest or one of the easiest channels to acquire users and followers on. So that's definitely a reason to jump in earlier rather than later. And last year it was much easier, and if you go back to 2019, it's just crazy. It was so easy to build a following if you were doing some sort of like to see content in sort of F&B or like fashion or something like that.
Right.
So yeah, those are the broad strokes on it. I mean, there's a lot of detail. Sure. I think it does certain formats do better. Comedy does really well. Certain products, F&B does better. Fashion does better on there, etc. Like it's a little bit like Instagram in that respect.
Right.
E-commerce is one thing though that's different in that terms of TikTok will be moving into e-commerce. Already is actually moving into e-commerce. And that's been quite successful in the China market. And we can definitely expect them to do the same internationally or try and replicate that success. So it's actually not just a channel for branding. You can actually do sales on there, or you will be able to do sales on there. And we've seen case studies of that in China.
Sure. That's fascinating. Yeah.
With your second question, what are the lessons to be learned around TikTok and how they grew up? Well, outside China, they did a fantastic job with their growth teams. Now, they were lucky in terms of basically they were just taking a product that had already been mature, very successful in China, a mature product that was very polished, and actually, one of the best internet products from the most competitive market in the world, the China market for mobile internet services, and then picking it out. So the product was actually really good. But still, what we learned, even with a killer product, basically, they still needed to spend a lot on advertising. So they did do a very good job in terms of building communities around the world. So they were very heavy on localization early on. They sort of broke off separate teams for different countries. But the first markets they attacked were Asia. So the very first markets they went into were South Korea, Japan, Vietnam, Thailand, places like that. And in each country, they had localized content teams and localized communities, sort of community managers to sort of build up influencers and creators. And when they were doing marketing, their first forays into marketing were spending with local influencers and getting celebrities onto the platform, realizing that with each localized language, you need to get those influencers. And what they found 2-3 years ago was actually a lot of those local language influencers were underpriced, that the big brands weren't spending that much on them compared to other channels. That was an efficient way to spend. But that doesn't scale globally. Once they've made their sort of hits, once they've tested the waters in several Asian markets and actually got to already something like 500 million MAU across Asia, and then they acquired Musical.ly, the original sort of innovator in this area, and combined those platforms. Now they need to scale globally. Now they shift over most of their attention and spend into Google and Facebook to acquire those companies. So even with a killer product, even with best-in-class growth teams, they were still having to give most of their budget to their rivals, actually, was the reality of how they scaled it. So I think that's actually, quite a sort of, I don't think we have to deal with the reality of what mobile is today. If you're doing a consumer product and you want to get to that level, the fact is, due to the dynamics of how mobile works, that's really what's necessary. And I don't think it's a good thing, to be honest, but it's the reality of where mobile is, this sort of walled garden ecosystem and these gatekeepers that we have. It's unrealistic to rely on word of mouth, even if you have a best-in-class product.
Sure. I mean, thanks for that. I mean, you shared some really fascinating insights there. I mean, some of the things that really stood out for me is how they localized content. So that was really key. And for a lot of startups who are trying to use content marketing or different platforms going into different markets. And of course, you mentioned something about growth teams and community. That's so important. And I think a theme that you sort of touched upon for both the larger organizations trying to use it as a marketing platform, and also for founders, is you mentioned getting in early, right? It's better to get in early and than to be late for the party. So for instance, whether you can find underpriced influencers as a startup founder. So and again, that's what we sort of talk about all the time, right? In the tech business, it's always important to pick on those trends and just identify the winner and go for it, right? So because right now, if somebody's trying to monetize their YouTube channel, it's so much more difficult, so much more challenging. In fact, there's a certain degree of fatigue, and the same with Facebook, right? Like you mentioned, and it'll be interesting to see how Facebook, the early adopters, as always, were the younger people, and now you'll see a lot of teenagers absolutely don't want to be on Facebook. So it'll be interesting to see that journey as well. Since you spoke about how essential marketing is, and this is something we talk about to a lot of founders, and startups that we work with. They come to us and they want us to build their platforms and apps and everything. And one of the first questions that I ask them is, what's your marketing plan? Right? We don't want to build an absolutely wonderful platform for you and then you don't know how you're going to market it. And sometimes, the response that we get is, but we'll figure it out when we get there. And, I always keep insisting you should have a marketing plan and you should have an idea about, and of course, we all have to be nimble these days, and you can't really, have a plan that you'll stick to for 5 years. But at the same time, you need to have a bit of a plan, which brings me to the next question about China Channel. Now, obviously, China Channel, your company that you're running, and for the listeners, you can go check it out, chinachannel.co. And so, Matt, tell us more about China Channel, and how can any of the listeners, sort of contact you, and how can you help them?
Yeah, sure. Just for that last point, I think it's so important. Like, there's a saying, like, first time founders focus on product and second time founders focus on distribution, right? So it speaks to that, like, once you've got a bit of experience, you realize that it's execution and things like distribution are just deal breakers in terms of a product as a startup.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Product is, everyone knows products, also really, really key. Yeah. So with China Channel, people know us because we do the largest annual conference for WeChat marketing for several years in China. So that's one of the things we do. We couldn't do it last year because of COVID, but we'll have to see for this year. Hope, fingers crossed, maybe we can do it again. But we did that for many years, and that's sort of like bring together all the digital marketers who speak English and focus on helping international brands into one place once a year. So it was a very special event that we, for 2 days, and with all different kinds of workshops and things like that. So that's definitely one of the things that people know China Channel for. That's the main thing, actually. For me, I spend most of my time now writing and speaking. And then I also do advise some startups as well around things like, well, they come to me usually for the China market. Most of them aren't ready, but they're just thinking of it, like well, there's two things really. One is like, is there an opportunity for our product in the China market? And then number two, are there lessons from China that we can apply? And I think often number two is the one that can really add the value, because there's so much. I mean, for a startup moving into China, I think it's a huge move. And like, if you haven't already made a big success in your home market, you probably shouldn't do it. But the fact is, like, for many of the things, there is something happening that's similar to your product in the China market. It's so vibrant in terms of the ecosystem there, but it's really like being on a different planet. It's like being on Mars, right? In terms of like how it all works, because the basic infrastructure is so different. Things like email isn't an effective channel to reach people, right? You have to reach them on WeChat. And so the dynamics there are just so different that all of the assumptions that you have around, especially marketing, and just don't apply to that universe, to that separate world. So, but having said that, people's needs are the same, right? Chinese people in general are, they're people, and they've got the same sort of problems that they have. If you start solving a problem, Chinese probably have that problem, but maybe it's being solved in a different way.
Right.
So there's going to be lessons in there, and the Chinese have, they're really, really good at building, especially consumer-facing internet platforms now, and so it's very likely that there will be some lessons and some ways to think about things for your startup that from China to apply.
Sure.
We've even found in some cases that already there's some key insight from the China market that actually came, when we did the research and found out, okay, actually there's a startup very similar to what you were doing in China. I spoke to the founder, and this is the problem they had, and it really, really helped the other team outside China.
Right.
Stuff like that, you can get lucky like that. But yeah, I think that's something I'm quite passionate about as well. It's especially recently because because of COVID, there's been a big wave of people trying to build social platforms and try to build social e-commerce platforms and trying to look at different ways. I think there's a real flourishing, right? There's an optimism around building new consumer-facing products and tools. And so, yeah, there's definitely something there to apply lessons from China over to these new wave of startups.
Absolutely. And I saw some really useful resources on your website as well. So I would urge the listeners to go check them out. And, I'm sure, you learn quite a bit, things that Matt has picked up over the years and, with a lot of research. So do check those out as well. And Matt, coming back to WeChat, I mean, since, you brought it up, and for a lot of our, clients in Asia and some of them in Europe, and other parts of the world, a lot of them are so fascinated with WeChat, but they don't quite get it. And, like you mentioned, email is not the right platform to reach people. And even not only, email, but the fact that even on your website, the contact form usually triggers a message to WeChat and not to like an email account or anything else. So, and the whole concept of now, obviously, we have Grab and Gojek and some of these really cool startups in Asia who are trying to be the super app, and I think have had moderate success. But I mean, I think they're all inspired by the WeChat model. So for all our listeners who know about WeChat from a personal point of view, a lot of us have been using WeChat for many, many years, either interacting with clients or interacting with some friends, in China. But from a point of view of business, right? So in the sense, I think there is still a lot of gap in terms of our knowledge, in terms of how we can use WeChat for marketing. How can we use WeChat to monetize our platform? So maybe you can, share a bit about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the deal with WeChat in China. It is a super app, and it's very, very different from Grab and Gojek. Grab and Gojek could never do what WeChat does. WeChat basically it replaces the open web in China, because in China, the open web's pretty much dead. People don't use browsers that much on mobile in China, very much less than in the West. Google doesn't have the same, Google's not in China, and Baidu doesn't actually replace Google in terms of they don't own Android, and they made a poor transition to mobile. So although it is mostly an Android market, we see that usage of search on mobile is less, and particularly browser usage is much less. Everything happens in an app. Everything happens in these walled garden ecosystems. Now, that means if you want to reach a Chinese consumer, you need to reach them on some kind of app. And that means usually there's a gatekeeper, and you've got to pay a toll, and it's very difficult. You don't really own the customer, right? So when we think about an owned channel, right, in the West, we think about, okay, I'm going to build my email list. I'm going to build my website, right? Traffic through SEO. And this is going to be, stable channels that I don't need to pay anyone for my customers to find me and to maintain that relationship. How do you do that in China? You can't do that on an Alibaba platform, right? You end up paying Alibaba every time, right? You don't own the customer. Not to single out Alibaba, just as an example. Okay, like it's the same for JD, it's the same for Pinduoduo. It's all of these companies. You've got an algorithm in the way between you and the customer.
Right.
But WeChat's different. WeChat's the place where you can actually own the customer. You can reach them when you want to reach them. It replaces email essentially, because if you want to reach, say, my wife in China, right, as a marketer, a typical Chinese consumer, you can't reach her on email. She's got an email, she doesn't really use it. If you want to send her a marketing message, it's not going to reach her. As someone who does marketing outside China, I just want to stress like how amazing, how mind-blowing it is to me that I can reach anyone in the world with an email address, pretty much. Yeah. Like, you can't do that in China. Like, if I want to reach someone, if I even know who that person is, the only reliable way I can reach them is WeChat, and WeChat doesn't work the same way. You can't find their ID, right? It's such a private, closed ecosystem that there's no way for me as a marketer to say I need to reach Mark in Shanghai. I know who he is, but you can't just email them. So all of these channels and expectations are different. But WeChat sort of replaces the open web here in terms of once someone is following you on WeChat, once someone knows your brand and has decided, okay, I want to follow your WeChat account or your mini program, okay, now you can connect to them directly. Now, that's not easy. I don't want to mislead you into thinking that WeChat marketing is a silver bullet. It's not. But it is an owned channel. It's the closest thing China has to an owned channel. And so that's why marketers come back to it. And there are some very cool things you can do with CRM in terms of segmentation of customers. And there's very, very cool things you can do with building mini programs, which are light applications, which live in WeChat. So the actual tools and infrastructure on WeChat is amazing. There's really no equivalent for it in the West. And you can actually do a lot of very, very cool things. And you can actually, there are startups that, and actually small and medium-sized enterprises that just essentially live, they don't have their own app. They have a website, but it doesn't get much traffic. And most of their interactions and transactions are happening through WeChat.
Fascinating. I think the way you describe it, we should actually stop labeling it as a super app. We should, probably call it the universe, right? Like the way you sort of very elaborately explain.
The key thing here is the payments, right? Like the WeChat Pay is a very important layer here. So, and the payments are embedded natively into the whole thing. And so paying anyone, there's no input of payment or information. There's no input of address information, even for most users, right? So plugging into that infrastructure as a startup is really, really strong. Imagine that, you can acquire a customer, a new customer, and the friction for them to buy your product is so low, because they don't need to it's like being on an e-commerce marketplace, right? It's like being on Amazon, where all they have to do is one tap to buy, essentially. But you own the customer. So it's all the good bits of being on Amazon with all the good bits of being like on your own website, but the friction from the user experience is super smooth. When you look at, you mentioned Grab and Gojek, right? Like before, like so different. Grab and Gojek's like nothing like that. These guys could possibly be like Meituan Dianping. I think that's a much better model for them to view, or even Alipay perhaps. But WeChat's a different beast.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you're right. They are trying to move towards the Alipay kind of a model in any case, with the new sort of digital banking licenses and everything in Singapore in any case. Anyway, that's a conversation for another time, and that's a very interesting conversation as well. So how do you say, an entrepreneur or a business owner in, let's say, Jakarta or Singapore, or let's say in the West, if they want to, tap into the China market, like you mentioned, it's not easy, right? Even the biggest tech companies have not been able to create a dent in the China market. It's a tough market in a lot of ways, but let's say, they are less threatening, right? Like medium-sized companies, they want to sell their products or services to, let's say, 500,000 people, or let's say if there is a B2B company who wants to sell to customers in China, and they feel that they have some very valuable services and products. So what would you say? What are the 2 or 3 things that they should start their journey with in order to make some inroads into the China market?
Yeah, well, I think there's 2 options. You can go on market if you're selling a product directly to consumers. You can go on the marketplaces, but that's not cheap. That's really very expensive, and
Right.
It's the problem with China is like it's the biggest market in the world, and everyone knows that. So it's actually by far the most competitive market in the world. In some markets, you would move into that and expect there to be like a handful of competitors in your category, 5, and then you come to China and there's like 30. Because everyone wants to be in there. Everyone's piling in there. Even country, there's on things like Tmall, countries have their own pavilions, so they aggregate all the small and medium-sized enterprises through the Chamber of Commerce or through the consulate or whatever system they've got going, and say, okay, like you guys can't afford to be on Alibaba by yourself, but we can have a country pavilion and stick all your products on there. So you've got all those models as well. That might be a viable model for some small and medium-sized enterprises. WeChat has the advantage of being able to test the market. So because of the system I just described, it's you can maybe test out much lower price and see if actually Chinese consumers even like your product. You don't want to spend a bunch of money and find out, oh, actually because of X, Y, and Z that we didn't think about or weren't even aware of, that actually this doesn't work the same way in China that it does outside. Chinese consumers, they do have localized preferences, and there's definitely differences around tastes, especially things like F&B or even like fashion with brands. So all of these things can mean that it won't, your product might not even work in the market. So testing it, well, WeChat is a good way to test it. You can work with a local agency to define goals for, say, okay, we want to spend this and see what we get. Just be aware that acquiring users, getting sales, all of these costs that you're used to, they're going to be higher in China. China's definitely going to be doing marketing digitally in China is more expensive than almost anywhere in the world. And so those expectations, I just want to lay down. The brands that do well are the ones that are in it for the long term. And they're committed to trying out testing different channels and different ways to do it. Whether they could actually some brands have done well on Douyin, the Chinese version of TikTok, with certain campaigns. You never know where exactly where it's going to work. But if you are going to go into China, be expected to spend, and I would say like go there for the long term. You might want to test it first or with WeChat and find, okay, just get past that. Do consumers actually need our products? Yes, they do. Okay, it can work in China. Okay, good. Now, are we going to commit to this long term to actually find the right ways to reach these consumers? I think that's a sensible way to look at it. But I would, for smaller brands, I would say unless you've got to a certain scale in your home market, don't even think about China. Like if you're not, we've seen some startups that are like still struggling to get product market fit in their market. And then they're like, oh, we need to go to China. I'm like, you haven't even got product market fit in your own market. So, that's that, be realistic as well, I think.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a very valuable piece of advice. I've seen so many of those startups, and because, everyone's so enamored with the China market, and they just have this strange notion that the minute their product just touches the shores, and suddenly 1.4 billion people will be, using that product. So of course,
let me just be clear. Like, if your product is genuinely unique, right? Everyone thinks their product is unique, but like, is it really unique? Like, if it really is unique and solving a problem, and there's nothing out there, and you have some barrier stopping local Chinese companies imitating it. A good example for that is Airbnb, right? Airbnb, there's loads of Chinese companies trying to copy Airbnb, but because of the network effects and the brand outside China, none of them can do it. So Airbnb has actually done a pretty poor job in China in some respects, but it doesn't matter because they've got, the local companies can't imitate their product well. So if you've got some barrier, some IP or something like that that's stopping them, that's a good one. And then like, if it's very niche, it's just a niche product that it's got certain audience and is probably not interesting enough, or there's a high enough barrier to producing that niche product, then that's a good sign as well. Those tend to be like the ones that do the best.
Sure, absolutely. And I mean, yeah, I was actually reading this article yesterday which said, a very important question to ask for founders who want to expand, or founders or even established companies when they want to expand to other parts of the world, is to ask themselves, what's their strength? Is it technology or is it geography, right? So for instance, a lot of times, in a lot of countries, most companies are successful because of a number of reasons, right? Because it's a great fit for that market, or in some cases, they were probably very early to the party and they just really captured that market before others could. But when you look at what they have to offer technologically, it's nothing phenomenal. So when they go into any other market, they really struggle. And I can name hundreds of companies like that, which are absolutely the kings in their own markets, but they have absolutely struggled in other markets. So I think, yeah, that's a great piece of advice. Obviously, it's important to believe as a founder, but at the same time, like you said, be realistic, before you enter a very, very competitive market like China. So talking about the China market, and just a couple of questions before we wind up is, what do you see, in terms of the trends? And like you said, you identified ByteDance quite early in the day in terms of this is going to be a huge success. Do you see any trends or companies that you see now which are going to be very exciting in a couple of years' time? And the reason I ask is for all the founders and decision makers, in different companies who are looking to sort of jump on an opportunity and grab that opportunity and say, oh, we sort of missed the bus on ByteDance and TikTok. Is there anything that comes to mind that you would like to share?
Sure. In terms of the next big things to come out of China, essentially, I don't see too much in terms of big internet companies that people aren't aware of already. I think people already know the names I've already mentioned: Meituan, Alipay, Pinduoduo, etc. Like right, these there's awareness around these. And I don't see any of those making big moves outside China. Where I am optimistic is certainly in gaming. Right. I think it's only a matter of time before there's big Chinese made in China IPs, a Fortnite, right? Or like a Mario Luigi, like real global mega hit gaming IPs that become household names across the world. I think in the next 3 to 5 years, there's definitely going to be one. There might be 2 or 3 come from China. I think that's not if, that's when. So that's one thing. And then in terms of Chinese brands, I think Chinese brands have got much more savvy in the last 5 years of how they market themselves. And actually we've seen in sort of traditional areas like makeup's a good example, cosmetics. So in local champions like Perfect Diary is the one that comes to mind, who have pushed back against the big French brands like L'Oreal or Maybelline from New York, right? Like all of these global mega brands in the cosmetics industry, like they've actually been able to build a brand in China and market that very savvily. I think you're going to see local Chinese mastered how to market in the China market now. And I think the next wave will be them going global and mastering global marketing. Now, there's so much pushback against China these days in terms of the West, to some degree fearing the rise of China and questioning, what does this mean for, all these political aspects. So Chinese brands do need to be aware of that. That hit TikTok quite hard last year. So the reality is that I don't think that's going away. And I think that Chinese brands will struggle in Western markets, perhaps simply because of those reasons alone.
Right.
But in many more neutral markets around the world, if you look at all these areas like Eastern Europe or Middle East or South America, all of or Southeast Asia, India, or India is actually going more sort of Western way, I guess. But like, there's many other markets around the world where you're going to see Chinese brands start to make a bigger impact. They're just more savvy, stuff you wouldn't expect them to be doing in terms of marketing and brand building that we really only expect from the global best-in-class companies. Now the Chinese have sort of caught up. They know how to do viral marketing campaigns. They know how to build something so that it becomes cool. All of these things that you see in South Korea, and how South Korea does, because we're at this point globally where we're in a lull where China everyone's aware that China's like this strong country now, and they've got technology and they're doing all these things now. What's China do? But the soft power's not there, right? They're still very bad at soft power. They haven't got any, they've got very, very few. There is a movie industry, for example, in China that's growing like gangbusters, and there will be global breakout hits in movies from China, but not yet. So there's not this sort of like soft power element, or these global brands like Nike, or even things like McDonald's, or Disney. All of these American brands that really, really help the soft power of America and people be comfortable with America as a country, because all of these great products and great brands come from America. China hasn't got that yet, but it's coming. It's coming, just like it came from Japan. Just like it came from South Korea. I think these East Asian markets, these are similar models here. So I think that will be the big change in the next 3 to 5 years. Will be, these, whether it's gaming, whether it's movies, or whether it's brands, not so much technology platforms, but all of these other areas, household names coming from China. I could see that.
Wow, that's really fascinating. I mean, I think that's a great analogy of how Japan did it and Korea did it, and China's probably almost getting to that part of their journey. So obviously they first mastered the manufacturing capabilities, and then capturing the domestic market. And I think, like you said, in the last 5 years or so, suddenly they've figured out how to appeal to an international audience. And like you rightly said, maybe the digital products and then the gaming products would probably lead the way. So maybe it's not the school bags or stationery or, fashion products or something. Maybe, we follow a different trend here, and that'll be very, very fascinating to watch. I mean, I can only imagine how exciting life must be for you in China. And it's definitely the most dynamic internet and digital market in the world right now. So what's next for Matthew Brennan? What are you up to? How's the year been for you? And I know China's managed things better than any other country, and so I'm sure movement within the country wouldn't have been that difficult. But what are your plans for a post-COVID world?
So right now I'm sort of finishing off the promotion for the book, I think, which has gone well. I'm sort of thinking about a second title of what would be the next one. That's definitely right now top of mind. Like I said, the conference, hopefully we might do that again this year. I have to see. And really just, I do a lot of, speaking and writing. So, although, as we say, travel is pretty difficult in this world, we're still doing a lot of it online. So I'm keeping myself busy with that. And then, I feel that at some point I need to do some form of content, that a new channel that will. I see there's a lot of opportunities right now, so it's just picking the right one. Whether that might be TikTok and doing short form video, or whether that's doing something like more like traditional sort of written content like Substack, etc. Something like that. So basically, a new content channel is on its way. We'll have to see. We'll have to make a decision. And then, just general sort of speaking and writing and thinking about the next book, because I feel there's so much to be done in terms of really deep dives on these Chinese companies. There's these are huge organizations now, and their stories are really interesting, and no one's really telling them through those formats. There's still today not that much content that's really quality and in depth. And I'm one of the few people who's well positioned to produce that. So I really just want to double down on that opportunity and do stuff that, fortunately, it's stuff that I love doing. So I wake up every day and really motivated.
That's wonderful. And we look forward to the next book. And we also look forward to the content platform. And if you're on TikTok, we'll be some of the first people to start following you. Matthew, Brennan,
Yeah, right.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking the time out. For all the listeners, just a reminder, Matthew Brennan, the author of Attention Factory, the story of TikTok and China's ByteDance. Please go get a copy. And also go check out the website chinachannel.co. Thanks, Matthew, once again for taking the time for this podcast, and we look forward to speaking to you again.